So I got people coming in and out. So I'm still reading this book. I'm going to look at the introduction next. And I'm listening to this Human Action podcast. I just finished listening to this one. And now we'll check out the introduction to Man, Economy, and State. Says the second edition with Power and Market. Murray Rothbard began work on this magnum opus on January 1st, 1952. Looks like they're using footnoting. Rothbard papers. On May 5th, 1959, Rothbard wrote to his mentor, Ludwig von Mises, informing him, "È finito." I guess that means it's finished, right? Yep, it is finished. The more than 7 years that it took Rothbard to complete Man, Economy, and State elapsed during what was up to that time one of the most sterile and retrogressive decades in the history of scientific economics, dating back to the birth of the science in the systematic treatise of Richard Cantillon, published in 1755. So they consider the science, economics, born in 1755 in Richard Cantillon's book. It says here, what is this? Essai sur la nature du commerce en général. Translated by Henry Higgs, New York, August Kelly, 1964. So this Richard Cantillon book be interesting to take a look at. In view of the progressive degeneration of economic thought throughout the 1950s, the eventual publication of Rothbard's treatise in 1962 was a milestone in the development of sound economic theory and an event that rescued the science from self-destruction. The era of modern economics emerged with the publication of Carl Menger's seminal work, Principles of Economics, in 1871. Is that... No, this is Richard Cantillon, 1755 was the birth. And here, the era of modern economics is said to start with Carl Menger, Principles of Economics, in 1871. In this slim book, maybe I'll look at that book, Menger set forth the correct approach to theoretical research in economics and elaborated some of its immediate implications. In particular, Menger sought to identify the causal laws determining the prices that he observed being paid daily in actual markets. Causal laws determining the prices that he observed being paid daily in actual markets. His stated goal was to formulate a realistic price theory that would provide an integrated explanation of the formation of market phenomena valid for all times and places. An integrated explanation. So, being paid in daily actual markets from Menger's Principles of Economics, translated by James Dingwall and Bert Hoslitz, New York University Press, 1981. Menger had worked as an economic journalist and market analyst for daily newspapers on and off for over a decade. For an overview of Menger's life and thoughts, see Joseph T. Salerno, Carl Menger, The Founding of the Austrian School, and Randall G. Holcomb, 15 Great Austrian Economists, Von Mises Institute, 1999, pages 71 to 100, and the sources cited therein. And let's see, integrated explanation, market phenomena, valid times and places, Thus, in his preface to the book, Menger, Principles, page 49, wrote, "I have devoted special attention to the investigation of the causal connections between economic phenomena involving products and the corresponding agents of production, for the purpose of establishing a price theory based upon reality and placing all price phenomena, including interest, wages, ground rent, etc., under one unified point of view." Emphasis added, right? That causal connections and based upon reality. All right, Menger's investigations led him to the discovery that all market prices, wage rates, rents, and interest rates could ultimately be traced back to the choices and actions of consumers striving to satisfy their most important wants by economizing scarce means or economic goods. Thus, for Menger, all prices, rents, wage, and interest rates were the outcome of the value judgments of individual consumers who chose between concrete units of different goods according to their subjective values or marginal utilities. To use the term coined by his student, Friedrich Weiser. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. With this insight was born modern economics. Friedrich Weiser. So now we got three names here, right? So we have Carl Menger, Principles of Economics in 1871. Richard Cantillon, published in 1755. Carl Menger, Principles of Economics, 1871. And then the student is Friedrich Weiser. With this insight was born modern economics. What was the insight? Thus, for Menger, all prices, rents, wage, and interest rates were the outcome of the value judgments of individual consumers who chose between concrete units of different goods according to their subjective values or marginal utilities. So with this insight was born modern economics. Menger's causal realist approach to economic theorizing quickly began to attract outstanding followers both in Austria and later throughout continental Europe and the Anglophone countries. What came to be called the Austrian school grew rapidly in prestige and numbers, and by World War I, theoretical research based on the causal realist approach was considered the cutting edge of economic science. For various reasons, the school suffered an amazingly rapid decline, especially in Great Britain and the United States, but also in Austria after the war. By the 1920s, the causal realist approach had been overshadowed by the partial equilibrium approach of Alfred Marshall in Great Britain, the U.S., and even parts of continental Europe. Its star fell further with the importation of the mathematical general equilibrium approach of, Leon Walras? I don't know how to pronounce that, into the English-speaking world in the early 1930s. A little later, Menger's approach was nearly buried by the Keynesian revolution. Hence, by the advent of World War II, there ceased to be a self-conscious, institutionally embedded network of economists actively engaged in teaching and research in the Mengerian tradition. So, for the factors underlying the rise and decline of the early Austrian school, see Joseph T. Salerno, The Plays of Mises, Human Action in the Development of Modern Economic Thought, in the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics 2, number 1, spring 1999, 35 to 65. Anyway, after World War II, a new and stifling orthodoxy known as the neoclassical synthesis had descended upon economics, especially in the United States. This so-called synthesis was actually a hodgepodge of the three disparate approaches that had overwhelmed the Mengerian causal realist approach in the interwar period. It jumbled together the Marshallian and Walrasian approaches to price determination with Keynesian macroeconomics. The first two approaches focused narrowly on analyzing the determination of unreal equilibrium prices either in single markets, partial equilibrium, or in all markets simultaneously, general equilibrium. Keynesian macroeconomics denied the efficacy of the price system altogether in coordinating the various sectors of an economy confronted with the, quote, failure of aggregate demand, unquote. This latter condition was supposed to have caused the Great Depression and was further alleged by Keynes and his followers to be an endemic feature of the market economy. The neoclassical synthesis thus proclaimed that the price system worked efficiently to allocate scarce resources only if the government deftly employed fiscal and monetary policies to maintain a level of aggregate demand or total spending in the economy that was sufficient to absorb a full employment level of output. Latter condition supposed to have caused the Great Depression. And it's an endemic feature of the market economy. This new orthodoxy also promoted hyper-specialization and a corresponding disintegration of economic science into a clutter of compartmentalized subdisciplines. Even the theoretical core of economics was now split into microeconomics and macroeconomics, which had seemingly very little connection to each other. Specialized journals proliferated and resulted in a radical change in the research culture, with a premium on the writing and reading of the latest journal articles. The few books that were published were technical monographs or dumbed-down textbooks. The era of the great systematic treatise on economic theory was at a close. Well, you know, in physics, we always look for grand unifying theories. So if you have microeconomics and macroeconomics, you would hope that there's some great overlying thing that if these are true, that these would follow from that, right? Anyway, the footnote says, indeed, in the preface to this treatise, Rothbard laments the demise of the old-fashioned treatise on economic principles after World War I and the ensuing progressive disintegration of economics, including economic theory, into compartmentalized subdisciplines on the factors that exacerbated this fragmentation of economics after World War II. That says two there, huh? See Joseph T. Salerno, Economics, Vocation or Profession, unquote. Ludwig von Mises, Institute Daily article, November 17, 2004. Available at Mises.org, story 1676. Almost the sole holdout against this intellectual revolution was Ludwig von Mises, with the publication in 1940 of Nation à l'Économie. I don't know how to pronounce that. The German language forerunner of Human Action. Mises single-handedly recovered and greatly advanced the system of causal realistic economic theory. In particular, he integrated Mengerian value and price theory with his own earlier restatement of monetary theory. In addition, he provided a rigorous foundation for the entire system of economic theory in a broader science of human action that he himself had expounded in earlier works and now further elaborated. This science of human action he now dubbed praxeology. Okay, so this, what was just set up here is what he's defining as praxeology. Unfortunately, Mises' great treatise was almost completely ignored by the post-war economics profession. However, while it failed to inspire an immediate renewal of the Mengerian scientific movement, Human Action did lay the foundations for its later revival. This revival was to be ignited by the publication of Man, Economy, and State in 1962. Let's see, so footnote 8. Ludwig von Mises, Human Action, A Treatise on Economics, Scholars Edition, 1998. Completely ignored by the post-war economics profession. On the reasons for this, see Salerno, The Place of Mises' Human Action, pages 59 to 761. 59 to 761. So that's a 702 page. The books that molded post-war economics were cut from a completely different cloth than Mises' treatise and dealt primarily with the formal techniques rather than the substance of economic theory. These included especially J.R. Hick's Value and Capital, an inquiry into some fundamental principles of economic theory, 2nd edition, New York, Oxford University Press, 1946. Paul A. Samuelson, Foundations of Economic Analysis, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 1947. And George J. Stigler, The Theory of Price, New York, Macmillan, 1947. This revival was to be ignited by the publication of Man, Economy, and State, 1962. Rothbard's central role in the modern revival of Austrian economics is detailed in Joseph T. Salerno, quote, The Rebirth of Austrian Economics in Light of Austrian Economics, unquote, in the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics 5, number 4, Winter 2002, 111 through, I guess that's 128. Okay, so the revival was to be ignited by the publication of Man, Economy, and State, 1962, when Rothbard initiated work on what would turn out to be a full-blown treatise. He conceived of the project as a book suitable both for lay readers and for college instruction that would bring to the surface and clarify the step-by-step nature of the edifice which Mises had constructed, but more or less had taken for granted that his readers would understand. This was necessary because Human Action was addressed to a scholarly audience, and Mises had accordingly assumed a great deal of familiarity among his readers with many of the concepts and theorems of what he called modern subjectivist economics. Subjectivist, I guess that's opposed to objective economics. So his readers with many of the concepts and theorems of what he called modern subjectivist economics. Thus, Rothbard intended to do for Mises what McCulloch did for Ricardo. That is, to make his work comprehensible to an intelligent lay readership. Rothbard to H. Cornuelle, March 14, 1951, Rothbard Papers. What McCulloch did for Ricardo refers to John Ramsay McCulloch's Principles of Political Economy. New York, Augustus M. Kelly, 1864-1965. Maybe published and translated or republished. All right, but Rothbard quickly realized that his original plan was flawed and had to be abandoned for three reasons. First, the traditional textbook format was too disorganized in its arrangement and treatment of various topics to accommodate the development of economic theory in the logical step-by-step manner that Rothbard had envisioned. As such, it was inadequate to convey a sense of the grand sweep of the coherent system integrating and pervading all aspects of sound economic doctrine. Coherent system integrating and pervading all aspects of sound economic doctrine. Second, Rothbard discovered that there existed a lot of gaps in Mises' economic organon that he had to fill in himself. Rothbard to Cornuelle, August 9, 1954, Rothbard Papers. In addition, Rothbard's step-by-step deductions led him to the conclusion that Mises' theory of monopoly, which was held by most economists in the Mengerian tradition, was irreparably flawed and had to be completely revised. The book was thus turning out to involve a good deal of original contribution on Rothbard's part. Third, as he proceeded in writing the book, Rothbard was concurrently researching the literature and reading widely, and he began to realize that human action had emerged from a very broad tradition that included many more economists than just Mises and his famous predecessors and direct protégés, e.g., Friedrich A. Hayek in the native Austrian school. Moreover, as Rothbard read and wrote, it became increasingly clear to him that the various strands of this theoretical tradition, which included many important American and British contributions, in addition to the great Austrian works, had not yet been completely integrated, and their principles fully delineated in a systematic treatise. Accordingly, Rothbard concluded, many essential points must be deduced originally or with the help of other works. And therefore, the book cannot simply be a paraphrase of human action. So that's out of Rothbard to Cornuelle, June 28, 1952, the Rothbard Papers. Rothbard's proposed book was thus transformed, in the very process of its writing, from a straightforward exposition of the principles of received doctrine of the Austrian school, narrowly conceived, to a treatise elaborating a complete system of economic theory and featuring many original and even radically new deductions and theorems. Mises himself immediately recognized the profound originality and significance of Rothbard's contribution. In his review of Man, Economy, and State, Mises wrote that Rothbard joins the ranks of eminent economists by publishing a voluminous work, a systematic treatise on economics. In every chapter of his treatise, Rothbard adopts the best teachings of his predecessors and adds to them highly important observations. That's Ludwig von Mises, Man, Economy, and State, a New Treatise on Economics. In item, Economic Freedom and Interventionism, an anthology of articles and essays. What is that? Edited Bettina B.N. Greaves, Irvington on Hudson, New York. The Foundation for Economic Education, 1990. Pages 155 to 156. Mises went on to characterize Rothbard's work as an epical contribution to the general science of human action, praxeology, and its practically most important and up to now best elaborated part, economics. Henceforth, all essential studies in these branches of knowledge will have to take full account of the theories and criticisms expounded by Dr. Rothbard. Given Mises' exacting scholarly standards and his well-known parsimony in paying compliments for scientific contributions, this is high praise indeed for a book published by a 36-year-old economist. The following statement is indicative of Mises' attitude in this respect. There never lived at the same time more than a score of men whose work contributed anything essential to economics. Mises, Human Action, page 869. More importantly, Mises evidently viewed Rothbard's work as opening a new epoch in modern economic science. Rothbard himself was not reluctant to indicate the respects in which he considered his treatise to have been a departure from or an advance upon Mises' work. Foremost among Rothbard's theoretical innovations was his formulation of a complete and integrated theory of production. Previously, production theory in causal realist analysis was in disarray and had consisted of a number of independent and conflicting strands of thought that treated capital and interest, marginal productivity theory, rent theory, entrepreneurship, and so on in isolation. Somewhat surprised by this yawning gap in production theory, Rothbard commented, Mises has very little detail on production theory, and as a consequence, it took me many false starts, and lots of what turned out to be wasted effort before I arrived at what satisfied me as a good production theory. It involved emancipation from 90% of current textbook material. Rothbard to Cornuelle Memo, Textbook or Treatise, Rothbard Papers.